So it seems that we're getting an enormous chunk of the Imperial Guard Codex early. We've got a full list of the Regimental Doctrines, Warlord Traits, Relics, Psychic Powers and Orders, new details on the Rogal Dorn tank, and a whole load of units that are unfortunately culled from the Codex. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where it seems that the new Astra Militarum Codex has escaped confinement in full force. So far we've only really had a few hints and teasers as to how the new guard might function, some coming from a few text sources and the Simply Warhammer YouTube channel, but today we've got a frankly staggering amount of new details, all coming from Mordian Glory. All of the details from this video are very much courtesy of Mr. Mordian Glory over on his YouTube channel. I unfortunately was a bit too slow to actually catch the stream itself, but I was able to catch up afterwards. If you're a guard player who's looking to jump into the new codex in full force, I would certainly check out his channel if somehow you managed to collect guard and be on YouTube already without hearing about him. There's nothing like having a channel quite so dedicated to the ins and outs of one faction in particular, and following the guard through thick and thin. I'm sure he'll be covering the new guard codex from every angle in all sorts of different details. So absolutely worth a sub for, in my opinion, as the codex drops and we get more information. His collection of leaks really are quite comprehensive this time. Apparently they're compiled from multiple different sources, cross-reference against each other a little bit to try and weed out anything that's less reliable, and in general they tend to focus more on the codex rules as opposed to the individual datasheets. We don't have a whole load of weapon profiles or anything here, but we do have some of the core sections of the codex, including relics and warlord traits. As with quite a lot of 40k leagues, apparently some of this is coming from early playtest copies of the Codex, which has been in development for quite some time, so there's always possible that even more confirmed stuff might be subject to change if Games Workshop decide to edit something late in the day. But still though, I'd expect the vast majority of these rules to be pretty darn close to what actually releases. I thought we could go through section by section, summarising some of the major themes, and talking about which of the rules look the most powerful. Obviously there's a bit of a limit to what we can say at the moment due to not knowing the datasheets and the points and things, but we can still make a few educated guesses as to what might look strong. So jumping right into it, there were a fair bunch of fairly big things that I thought would go through first before going through the more complete leaked sections. Apparently Lehman Russes don't get grinding advance anymore. As I was kind of expecting, they just seem to have consolidated all the rules into the main profile of the gun. It should mean that they'll be able to move around quicker on the board and hopefully won't lose too much damage output. Probably a good thing on the whole. There's a bit more confirmation on new models, Rough Riders and a new Lord Solar model. We kind of knew that the Rough Riders were coming anyway from that rumour engine picture that they showed us of the hunting lads. The new Lord Solar model is likely to be a Supreme Commander for the faction, and he'd already been heavily hinted already, including that blurry picture that we saw most likely of him on the Codex cover. Apparently he's a cavalry model with 12-inch movement. I'm sure we're giving some staggeringly good command buffs as well. It's pretty exciting to get a lightly new faction commander. Another theme of the Codex seems to be that quite a few of the regimental units are getting their own datasheets, even if a fair few things seem to have gone away. Apparently Krieg Guardsmen might well be getting their own datasheet, maybe with some special rules to emphasise their fighting style, and the same is true of a couple of other regimental special units, say for example Cadian Shock Troops and White Shields. I feel like this regiment system that they're going for really is a bit of a peculiar one. I sort of wonder with all the complexity it's adding whether it might just have been better to stick to standard chapter tactics style regiment tactics. Apparently we may have to choose between the regiment traits and Hammer of the Emperor. This does seem like a very weird rule indeed. One I'd definitely like to see the full text of. I was suspecting that Hammer of the Emperor might be the army-wide special rule that you got if you fielded pure guard, but that might not be the case if you're having to choose between regimental doctrines or that. Apparently in some way it might tie in with also gaining leadership of officers to nearby units. Not 100% sure if I understood that one properly, but I could easily see an army-wide special rule of some sort giving officers their leadership to nearby infantry. Unfortunately, there is a fair bit of bad news in the Codex. There do seem to be some limited options, and in particular a bunch of rather iconic units just not existing whatsoever. A bunch of these I feel like there's really little reason for Games Workshop to really pull at this point. They really could just give us the different datasheets and just have them represented by infantry squad models as they are now. But apparently we're not going to be able to field conscripts, veterans or special weapons squads as previous rumours had mentioned. I think that's really quite disappointing, to be honest. They're units that have been quite iconic for the Guard and being able to field for literally additions now. Particularly conscripts and veterans, I don't really see why they'd need to pull them, even if they just restricted their war gear choices to what's in the infantry squad box. Things could well be a little bit limited on the infantry front, though apparently with special detachments we might be able to field more of them. Otherwise, a bunch of characters aren't making it through to the new codex either. Commissar Yarrick, Knight Commander Pask, and Creed and Kel. I guess this is probably in line with them retiring older resin models, and basically if they aren't selling it, it isn't going to be in the codex anymore. Perhaps Creed and Kel were kind of expected. We've almost got the update for Creed in his daughter being his successor with the same greatcoat and stuff. Yarrick and Pask going I think is really quite disappointing as well though. Iconic characters and not models that they really needed to get rid of. I guess you could probably still field the models if you had them as just regular commissars or tank commanders or something, but still it's a bit sad. Next up though, for a bit more positive news, apparently there's going to be some form of special detachments to allow platoons. Some units get the platoon keyword, and you might be able to field them as an additional detachment within the same army, and be able to spam quite a lot of infantry squads if you take them. Mr. Mordian Glory said that it would be kind of similar to Drukhari raiding forces, having a bit of a command point refund if you take your army in a certain way. I think that would be quite nice if true, and that is something that a lot of people have requested from the Codex. Currently it feels weirdly annoying to spam out lots of troops and it costs you a lot of command points to do so, even though that's perfectly fluffy for big infantry regiments. I guess at least if conscripts are going, it might not be too hard to put a whole load of boots on the ground. Next up, Scions are apparently moving to the elite slot unless your entire detachment are Scions. I guess that probably makes sense rather than have them being placeholder troops for, say, a standard regiment detachment. They either properly take up the role of elites or they have the centre stage if you're fielding an army of them. I guess that kind of makes sense. Though apparently they have also fallen victim to no model, no rules, and apparently the special weapons that you have to field will represent the unit in the kit. Apparently you can still take 2 special weapons per 5, but you can't double up, say, on 2 melter guns or 2 plasma guns. You can only take 2 of them if you're taking a 10-man squad. This would be very in line with what Games Workshop has done for similar units, say like the Leagues of Votan. Again though, this has been met with a bit of an eye roll every single time they've changed the codex to work this way. Finally, Mordian Glory did seem very positive about the command squad, seeming as it looked like a really quite fun and flexible unit now. Apparently you get the base command squad that you can see in the kit. That comes with 5 models as standard, with the officer being tied to it now, but then you can take additional regimental advisors, taking models like the Master of the Ordnance and the Officer of the Fleet, and you can also attach Ogre and bodyguards now, so that might well be the way that they work. I guess we'll have to wait and see how good the regimental advisors are for the points cost, but apparently the Ogrin gets 2 tank wounds in a similar way to the Traitor Ogrin and Commissar for the Chaos. Moving on, there were a fair few details for the Rogal Dorn battle tank. This one I think we had a few details from already from prior leaks, including the rumoured toughness 9. Apparently it hits on 4s, has 17 wounds, toughness 9 and a 2+ save, and will be somewhere in the region of 250 to 280 points. That does seem to fit the bill of somewhere between a Lehman Russ and a Baneblade. For the turret weapons, apparently there's the choice between the twin battle cannon and the oppressor cannon and coaxial autocannon. Turret weapons in the new guard decks apparently get a +1 to hit. Again, that was a feature of previous leaks. I don't believe that we've got the battle cannon stat line confirmed, but I would guess that it would go to damage 3 now. That's what the Defiler battle cannon got when the Chaos one got a release. If you swap out the twin battle cannon, then you can take an oppressor cannon and coaxial autocannon. The oppressor cannon looks like it might well be a fairly heavy anti-tank choice. D6 plus 3 shots at strength 10, AP 3 and damage 4, a 90-inch range and blast. Hitting on 3s with an average of 6 or 7 shots, that's going to pack a bit of a punch. Should be dealing some hefty damage to enemy armour at long range. To back that up, it gets a choice between a Castigator Gatling cannon and a Pulverizer cannon. I'm going to guess that they're hull mounted, as I can't see where else they'd fit on the tank. No idea what they do, but I'm going to guess that a Gatling cannon's probably going to be bad news for infantry. The sponsored weapons that we've seen in the corners of the tank on previous leaks have the choice between heavy bolters and multi-melters, and apparently there's also the choice of taking twin heavy stubbers or 2 melter guns somewhere on the tank. No idea if they'd also be attached to the sponsons or if they'd be somewhere else. Finally, it's got a vehicle upgrade called Armoured Tracks. That gives it a +1 save against damage 1 weapons. Perhaps a little bit underwhelming to be honest. It'll help against some things, but be completely irrelevant at most of the things that are going to be the biggest threats to the tank. Overall sounds pretty scary, very beefy and threatening. I guess we'll have to weigh this up against the new Lehman Russ profile when we do get the full rules for that, and work out with the points cost as to whether or not it's more efficient. I do feel like the two are probably going to be in direct competition here, and I do hope that Games Workshop managed to both make the Leman Russ and the Rogal Dorn tank viable, and not just have the new boy be the clear and most obvious pick. Moving on, we've got a complete list of Regimental Doctrines as well. This does include the two that were previewed on Warhammer Community, and as Warhammer Community said, apparently we get to pick two of these to apply to the entire army, and certain units might be able to get rules to put a different one on as well. Say for example, Scions are supposedly supposed to get 3. First up we have Mechanized Infantry, which allows you to disembark after moving, plus gives you a keyword. That's really quite a big one, to be honest. If you're going to be playing some sort of transport army, I think that one would be absolutely invaluable. Just disembarking after the tank has moved would be quite good. If you also get to do your own normal movement after that as well, then that's really quite massive, and it could get infantry into a very threatening position very quickly, maybe to deliver some special weapons fire. Whether or not that's quite as efficient now veterans and special weapon squads aren't a thing anymore might be another question, but I wouldn't write off guard infantry damage output until we've seen the stats and the points. Parade Drill is the Warhammer Community one, stay still for lasguns getting to fire at heavy 2. Unless there's been some major changes to lasguns or more synergy with them, that's not going to be very overwhelming. Armoured Superiority makes vehicles better on objectives, Sentinels count as 3 models, vehicles as 5 and super heavies as 10. Certainly wouldn't hurt, I suppose. We don't yet know whether Leman Russ tanks are still going to get OBSEC and Spearhead detachments yet. If they do, then I guess that could make them genuinely quite threatening, though typically you don't really want them on the front lines in the first place. Blitz Division allows you to halve power level costs for strategic reserves, and you can come in at any point on the board, including your opponent's deployment zone in turn 2. Not sure whether you'd be able to go in behind the enemy or not. I'd have to see the full wording of the rule for that. It doesn't really seem super strong though. Even at best you're probably saving only like 2 CP for that, which isn't the biggest deal compared with a whole army buff. Bombardiers gives you +1 to hit for artillery if there's a sentinel or vox unit that can see an enemy unit, and is within 12 inches of an artillery piece. I feel like this one's really quite thematic. You could essentially have spotters that can spot the enemy target, and then the artillery unit gets to shoot them. Seems like it could be a good way of getting a big damage buff against enemy units in the open, while your own artillery remains hidden. If you're going big on the artillery, that one seems pretty much a no-brainer to me. You probably need to make sure that you have a few of the relevant units around. Heirloom Weapons seems to be the reincarnation of the Vostroyan trait. That's +4 inch range to all guns now. Seems like that would be most useful on really short range weapons, things like flamers and pistols and things. 16 inch melter guns would be pretty nice as well, and it will be quite useful for mid-range stuff as well. Demolisher cannons might like this too. Seems very good for a broadly shooting faction. Brutal Strength is the reimagination of the Katachan one. It's now in 2 parts. You get to move and shoot heavy weapons for no penalty, and you get +1 strength to infantry in the first round of melee only. The first round of combat is almost always the most important, so pretty nice there. I think there's at least a reasonable chance that we don't get multiple stacking plus attacks anymore though. I'd guess we'd still get a Priest War Hymn ability for +1 attack there. I'd guess getting 3 attacks out of 1 Guardsman though might well be a thing of the past. Grim Demeanor allows you to ignore negative combat attrition modifiers. Not terrible over an entire army. Maybe if you are taking lots and lots of infantry it could be alright, but it's not awesome. Guerrilla Fighters gives you light cover to infantry and sentinels at I believe greater than 12 inch range. I quite like that one if you are taking an infantry heavy army. A nice flat durability buff is pretty awesome when you can field lots and lots of models on the board. Not good to help against combat armies or close range stuff, but it's a nice to have. Elite Shock Troops seems like a pretty reasonable pickup for plenty of armies. Reroll 1 hit roll per unit. When you've got lots of units with heavy weapons running around, that is going to add up to a decent amount more damage over a game. If you're unsure about a pick, that one seems like a pretty easy one to include. Industrial Efficiency allows you to treat AP-1 as AP0. According to Mr. Mordian Glory, that was released prior to the Armour of Contempt rule coming out, so there's a reasonable chance that Games Workshop might change it to something similar to, say, the Salamanders, ignoring wound rerolls. Swift as the Wind is the Talon one. Infantry get a +1 inch move, everything else gets an extra +2 inch move, and also everything gets +1 to charge as well. Again, I feel that one's really not too bad, maybe particularly for the vehicles with that extra 2 inches. Your tanks and things would have just that little bit of extra stretch to get lines of sight or range on things that they might have been struggling with. Trophy Hunter gives you +1 strength at attacks versus monsters and vehicles. I feel like that one actually could be quite interesting for certain army builds. Say if you maybe wanted to spam loads of autocannons, then going from strength 7 to strength 8 against monsters is really quite big. A little bit on the niche side as not every army has monsters or vehicles, but I feel that could be quite good whenever something like Knights gets pretty powerful in the meta. Recon Operators allows Cavalry and Sentinels to get a pre-game move. Pre-game moves are really quite nice to have, but I'm kind of concerned that that might mean that Sentinels might not be getting their pre-game movement anymore. Maybe the Scout one might get a forward deployment instead or something. Hopefully they still have some sort of value with scouting. Finally, Cult of Sacrifice, the new Krieg one, is +1 to hit when the squad gets below starting strength. As I said when this one was announced, I feel like it's a bit on the niche side. A lot of time in 40k, squads just get outright killed rather than just damaged, but every time you do have a lone surviving special weapon squad or something, that is going to be quite nice to hit on 3s. Overall, I do find it a bit weird not having full regiments. It does seem that we don't get any sort of regimental warlord traits or relics or stratagems anymore, which is really quite sad. Though I think that taking 2 of these in concert does seem like it could give you some really quite interesting and different army list builds. Perhaps out of this list, I feel like the elite shock troops for the single hit reroll is pretty nice. Guerrilla fighters could be quite good if you're infantry heavy. Heirloom weapons for the extra 4-inch range seems like it's really quite solid for the vast majority of guard armies. Most of the damage is ranged. Bombardier seems really nice for the +1 to hit if you are spamming artillery. And Swift as the Wind seems again like a very helpful army boost across the game. Just occasionally that will make some big differences, like getting lines of sight, reaching objectives, or making charges if it makes sense to. I feel like the hit reroll plus the extra range though might well be a go-to. Seems hard to go too far wrong with that. Moving on, we've got a whole bunch of orders. As perhaps expected, orders are now going to be issued in the command phase instead, but in a league that makes me really quite happy, there's also the possibility of issuing an order when you disembark from a transport vehicle. Really quite nice that they thought of this for mechanised armies, as if they had limited orders to just the command phase, then they would suffer the same sort of problems that things like chaplains would have, struggling to lead their troops once they're disembarking from a drop pod or something. Apparently the infantry order range will remain at 6 inches, tank commanders' order range will go out to a big 12 inches, and according to a leak that came in the stream itself, they will still apparently count as auras. If so, then that means that you could be issuing orders to really quite a lot of units, particularly for the tank orders on the tank commanders. You might just need literally 1 tank commander to cover a whole host of tanks, and that does sound pretty fun. Apparently there's at least 1 extra tree of orders for commissars to issue to infantry, so there will be more infantry orders than there were before. Though again, anything regimental specific has either been folded into standard orders or just got rid of entirely. First up, we've got the standard infantry orders. These are the ones that the normal commanders like the Castellan and the command squad can issue. First rank fire, second rank fire makes lasguns into heavy 3 weapons. I think that one's really quite cool to be honest. It does make them worse than they would have been previously within 12 inches, but perhaps a lot better if stationary and you're firing out to 24. I guess it will be particularly nice with that new brutal strength one for moving and firing with heavy weapons. That would mean that you could just plug away with this as you move up. Overall, I'd say it's a bit of a side grade, not entirely all negative, but maybe more of a nerf than a buff. Again, will be interesting to see if any of the rest of the lasgun's profile has changed in any way. Take aim seems really quite powerful now, a +1 to hit and an extra AP at range. That's 2 absolutely great shooting buffs in one there. I feel like that is probably usually going to be superior to first rank, second rank, maybe unless you're aiming at mass infantry and you've got an entire squad of lasguns that's standing still. Fixed bayonets basically gives you the same in combat, a +1 to hit and an extra pip of AP. It no longer gives you a fight again anymore, which was kind of nice to have, but at least on paper, maybe if you could get an extra +1 attack from a priest or something, that could make brutal strength on the Catachan seem quite powerful. Take cover gains you light cover, and if you're in light cover then you gain dense as well. I guess that's moving here from the stratagem section. Kind of cool that you can just issue that now to a whole bunch of your units nearby. If infantry need to do no more than just survive on an objective, then it looks like that one might be one of the ones to go for. Move is understandably quite nerfed. Previously it was guardsmen moving as fast as jet bikes, now it's just +2 inch to movement, and if you advance then you gain an automatic 6 inches. It's still a very solid 14-inch guardsman squad movement if you want it, I guess even 15 with the Talon one, but no longer just going to absolutely catapult squads from one side of the board to the next. Suppression fire is a really interesting new one. You get to shoot 1 enemy infantry unit and 1 only. If you gain 5 or more hits on them, then the enemy infantry unit gets -1 to hit in their next turn. That one's really quite funky, handing out a -1 to hit if you just focus fire. Kind of weird that you could maybe achieve that on something big like, say, a big unit of Chaos Terminators or something with no more than a standard issue guard squad. It seems pretty good though. Trade out some of your damage or extra survivability for making one squad significantly less good at killing things. Again, I feel like that could be pretty popular. Out of these, to be honest, most of them do seem pretty good still. I think my favourite two, just from the first read, are Take Aim and Take Cover. The rest literally all seem usable though, and I do quite like the idea of Suppression Fire. Moving on to other orders, and tank orders appear to have gained 6 of them now. There used to only be 3. First up, we've got Pound Them to Dust. I think that was the old Cadian one. It now allows blast weapons to count the enemy unit as double the amount of models for the blast special rule. That looks like it will be super relevant on things like plasma cannons getting up to automatic 3 shots, and of course anything that allows you to count a unit as over 10 models. That could get you automatic 6s on any D6 shot blast weapons. That will be pretty nice. A bit situational, but depending on what you want to shoot, that could be great. Full Throttle is a +2 inch to your move, and you count as stationary for shooting even if you're advanced. Averages out an extra around about 5 or 6 inch worth of movement there. If you do need that to gain your extra line of sight, then it's really nice to have that option. Quite nice for late game objective grabs too, I guess. Gunner's Kill on Sight is the nice dependable reroll ones to hit. I'm sure that will remain very popular for tank commanders with the Executioner Plasma Cannon. A nice generic damage boost is rarely a bad thing. Blitz Them gives you a chance for some mortal wound impact hits in combat. You get to reroll charge rolls and have a 4+ chance to deal D3 mortal wounds in combat, +1 if you've got a Dozer Blade. I guess that could be fun if you've got a few vehicles that could potentially all charge like an enemy infantry unit with 1 or 2 hard models left. Focus fire with all the guns elsewhere, and then just simply run over the enemy models that were in your way. Still though, probably a bit situational compared with damage boosts. Shock and Awe allows you to gain OBSEC, could be very nice if that does flip an objective. Not always going to be relevant, but later in the game that could be the most important thing. And finally, Pinning Fire is kind of a mirror image of the infantry one. Shoot one enemy infantry unit. If you get 5+ hits against them, then they get -2 inch movement next turn. I guess if you could really annoy an enemy Death Star with that could be alright. Still though, you'd have to weigh it up against extra damage from rerolling the ones, and that might well kill a whole extra model or something. Again, it seems really quite well thought out. None of them seem unusable. The standard extra damage boost one is still there. For me, I think that'd be the go-to, and then literally all the rest are options if they make more sense than just extra damage. Say if you do need Full Throttle for extra line of sight or movement. Lastly, on the orders front, we have a section that Mordian Glory thought were the Officio Prefectus orders, and to me that does sound very likely indeed. Basically infantry style orders with titles that kind of sound like they've just been issued directly from a commissar's mouth. Forwards for the Emperor allows you to advance and shoot without penalty, or move and shoot without penalty if you had heavy weapons. Still a very useful one to have around, a good halfway house between just running flat out and still keeping up a decent rate of fire. Get Back in the Fight allows you to either shoot or charge after you've fallen back, but not both. I guess shooting is usually going to be the most relevant, and that's pretty nice for when your battle line gets charged. At all costs means that you gain OBSEC, and if you already had it, then you get to count as +1 model. Again, very useful if it matters for switching an objective to yours. Duty and Honour means that you can do actions even if you fell back or advance or you got to shoot. That one's nice enough. Keeping up firepower while you're doing actions is fine. Really quite a nice option to have to be able to flex into, as opposed to have to commit to it pre-game. Show Them Steel, Show Them Contempt is a +1 leadership and a 5+ save against mortal wounds. Not too bad at all if you're playing against Thousand Sons or something. And finally, Remain Vigilant is units can't set up within 12 inches and they get a 5+ Overwatch. Screening out enemy reserves to 12 inches really is quite a big deal against some units. That means that some armies like Genestealer Cults just simply aren't going to be able to drop nearby, which would depress them quite a bit. It sounds like the 12-inch bubble goes to the ordered squad rather than from the commissar themselves. Overall, I feel like these do have some pretty interesting implications. They could make commissars a lot more of a useful unit that you kind of need to have in the battle line, rather than literally just being a leadership buffing tool that's not particularly well taken right now. Always good to have good reasons to field some really nice iconic guard units. From one of the other bits mentioned, it sounds like these orders might well be able to apply to things like Auxilia. That kind of makes sense, as commissars often lead Ogrins and things into battle, I suppose. Could be nice to get them objective secured if that's the case. Overall seem good though. They feel like they're a bit more of supporting type choices as opposed to the raw damage dealers of the standard infantry orders. Definitely seems like having a commissar and a company commander within the same battle line could both be good assets. Tank aces next, and as predicted by just about everyone, they do appear to be a points cost upgrade rather than costing CP. And according to these leaks, it appears that they can equally go on super heavies as they can on the standard battle tanks like the Lehman Russ and the Rogal Dorn. And they are points cost upgrades, though we don't actually have the points costs for them yet, meaning that it's a little bit hard to judge which ones are actually going to be good. First up, there's one that allows a super heavy tank to become an officer and issue an order, and this order can be issued to other super heavy vehicles. I kind of wonder if this one might have been from a different source or something, as apparently it wasn't named whereas the rest were, and there is also a similar one that allows a tank to become a steel commissar and get one of the officer prefectus orders. Either way, having a massive super heavy tank that issues orders really does seem quite cool. It really does make me think of the Fortress of Arrogance, Yarek's own ride. Could be a really cool way to represent that on the board. Otherwise, we've got Meticulous Calibrator, ignores cover. That looks like it could be a really nice pickup if it was cheap enough to put on a big tank. Just a really nice little boost for a gun platform. Otherwise, there's Mechanical Pact. Wound rolls of 1 to 3 always fail against this tank. Not a terrible toughness boost to basically get transhuman physiology here, but still not super useful on tanks that are already quite tough. You're only really going to be helping yourself out against things that are strength 9 or bigger, and not even that on the supposedly toughness 9 Rogal Dorn. Veteran Commander allows you to gain an additional Regimental Doctrine. I guess in theory something like a plus 4-inch range could be very nice on a Demolisher cannon perhaps. I'm sure there's a fair few others that might be useful. Knight of Piety gives you a 5+ invul and a 5+ save against mortal wounds. A nice all-round damage boost, but it's only going to be all that relevant against very high AP things. Presuming that the 2+ save is still in effect, then you'd need some very high AP to get onto that invul, probably more useful against mortal wounds. Finally, Master of Camouflage gains light cover at greater than 12 inches, or greater than 18 inches for super heavies. An extra pip of save on top of a 2+ armor save is always great. We don't know whether Armor of Contempt is going to remain into the new Guard Codex or not. It will depend on whether or not Games Workshop changes up the balanced data slate. If it does remain, then that one seems pretty massive to be honest. If it doesn't, a little bit less so, but still very good. Overall, maybe a little bit more of a limited list than I might have expected. Generally speaking though, they usually seem pretty handy. Mechanical Pact seems perhaps a little bit less useful, but depending on the points cost, I think most of the rest seem like they could be fine. I think this is one of the ones where points cost is really going to say whether they're good or bad. Psychic next, and according to Mordian Glory, these might well not be in their final form, but this is the rough gist. There's apparently at least some chance that these might have been changed since playtest rules and might not be quite as strong when the codex actually comes out. First up, Terrifying Visions is a multi-part leadership thing. Warp Charge 6 and one enemy unit gets -2 leadership, can't use Insane Bravery or reroll morale, and you also get a 2d6 versus this modified leadership, and they can't do actions if that fails. Still basically amounts to an okay leadership debuff to be honest. I'm still not sure it's going to be taken massively. Certainly way better than it is currently though. Gaze of the Emperor remains a weakish beam attack, 1d6 per enemy unit crossed with a line within 12 inches. On a 2 to 5 they get a mortal wound, on a 6 they get d3. You're going to need to skewer at least 3 units to really make that worth it to be honest. I still don't think that's going to get taken at all. Psychic Barrier has shifted a bit. It's now just a 5+ invul save rather than a flat +1 to your armor save. It kind of shifts it from being the best on the toughest units to best on some of the weediest. Maybe okay on light vehicles or infantry squads. Kind of a shame that if conscripts aren't going to exist anymore, we might lack a really big targets to put this on and make them extra tough. Seems okay, probably a lot less useful than previously. Night Shroud is now can't be hit on hit rolls of 1 to 3, and it can only be used on super heavies on a certain high psychic test value. Seems nice and fairly reliable, stopping to damage on one certain unit. Seems like that'd be pretty nice on something like a tank commander to help keep them safe. Mental Shackles messes with enemy movement, Warp Charge 6 and 18-inch range, a -2 to move, advance and charge. If you could stick that on an enemy big Death Star type unit, it'd be good. If not, then probably not. Again, I suspect it might not be one of the top picks to have in the arsenal. Finally, we've got Psychic Maelstrom, Warp Charge 6 and 18-inch range. This one's quite fun, as you roll 1d6 per number on the psychic test taken against the closest unit. so say rolling 8d6 if you happen to cast it on an 8. For each 5+, you get a single mortal wound up to a cap of 6, and that usually means that you'd average something like 2 to 3 mortal wounds out of this one. Really quite nice if you ask me. Quite a solid witchfire, though nowhere near as useful for sniping characters as it previously could be. Overall, I'd say they're all right. They've certainly taken a bit of a side grade from before, and I think we will have to see exactly which units could get good benefits out of them when we do have all the datasheets. I feel like Night Shroud might be one of the single most interesting ones, and Psychic Maelstrom is a pretty decent witchfire. Psychic Barrier could potentially be very good if there's good units to target with it. Maybe if Ogrin got dead good, then they could be a good target for that. Warlord Traits next, and apparently there is a bit of a chain of command going on. An officer must be your warlord, and he can only have one castellan per detachment, and the highest ranking officer about must be the warlord. You can't just give it to some random other character in the ranks. First up, we've got Frontline Combatant, 2 extra hits on 6s in melee and a +1 to wound. Really quite a strong fighting warlord trait, to be honest. To be fair though, it does kind of have to be with guard warlord traits. The characters themselves just don't really have particularly impressive melee stat lines, so anything out of something outstanding is still not going to get them to being a massive threat. Probably not the first one you'd choose, but doesn't seem bad for a hidden threat within the ranks, I guess. Master Tactician is a very good one though. Redeploy 3 units besides Titanic units, you can put them in strategic reserves as well. Really nice for getting first turn positioning versus the enemy. If they've got lines of sight to key tanks or something, then you could hide them. If you're going first and you need the line of sight yourself, then redeploying might be able to get you the jump on certain enemy units. Quite a big one, seems very likely that a lot of lists will take that. Grand Strategist is the good old reliable 5+ to regenerate CP when you spend them. If you're unsure, that one's really going to be bad, and could well be a good one to buy in for an extra CP as well. Superior Tactical Training allows you to access other types of orders, so an infantry order could use a tank order or a commissar order. There's probably some interesting implications or combos you might be able to do with that. Maybe getting 2 tank orders out of a Castellan could be interesting if that's possible. Again, might be handy to see the full wording on that one. Old Grudges seems like it could potentially be a bit weaker. Select one enemy unit pre-game, and you get an aura of +1 to hit against that unit. A decent damage buff against one given target again, but not quite as good as the full reroll wounds that it was. Finally, Lead by Example allows the officer to issue orders to its own unit. I guess that means that you could have a command squad moving or something like that. It certainly implies that you can't do it on normal officers anymore, so no longer having them scooting around, moving super fast to get to objectives and things, but I'm not sure it's going to be quite worth it enough to have that as an option, not compared with one of the other warlord traits. Out of these, I feel like Master Tactician and Grand Strategist seem kind of standard and reliable. Hard buffs to turn down, to be honest. Maybe Superior Tactical Training might be one of the other most interesting ones. Getting access to even more flexible orders does seem pretty good. Lastly, we come to Relics. It does seem that there's a fair few of these. The Emperor's Benediction is a 3-shot 18-inch range, strength 4, AP 2, damage 2 bolt pistol. It ignores lookout sirs and gives you mortal wounds on 6s to wound. Basically a kind of sniper bolt pistol really. Probably still doesn't quite break into being worth it though. The Tactical Auto Reliquary of Tiberius allows you to do 1 extra order. Seems okay for a command squad if you're only able to issue 1. Could be quite good for a commissar or something as well. 2 orders out of them could be good if they can take it. The Death Mask of Alanius gives you a 4+ invul to the bearer's unit. Maybe that one's aimed for command squads perhaps, to give a little bit of toughness to the entire squad. I guess that could make them genuinely a little bit harder to shift, though still I don't think it's going to get them into the realm of being massively durable. I think it's the Barbican's Key that's next, unless I misheard that. It's used by an infantry character, and they get to teleport anywhere on the board greater than 9 inches from the enemy, and on that same turn they get to reroll charges. Unless I'm misunderstanding anything and they get to teleport an infantry squad with them, it does seem maybe a little bit more tame. Maybe it could be interesting enough for objective shenanigans, but 1 officer or 1 command squad on their own don't seem like they'd be quite good enough to deal mass damage perhaps. Kiro's Aquila is an interesting mess up of an enemy stratagem. When an enemy has used a stratagem, you get to choose it to have +1 CP for the rest of the game. Kind of similar to a couple of other abilities in 40k right now. Say for example, if a knight player used rotate ion shields, you could have that be more expensive for the rest of the game from then on. Flat damage boosts are always interesting, and Gatekeeper is a relic battle cannon. It's 72-inch range, heavy D3+6, strength 9, AP 3 and damage 3. Certainly a very meaty and mighty anti-tank weapon there. At the moment, my guess would be that battle cannons will be a similar profile at Strength 8 AP2, so it's probably the strength and the AP that you're gaining there, but not knowing what you're upgrading from does make it a bit hard to judge this one. Certainly seems threatening enough though, a really big anti-tank punch. The Relic of Lost Cadia now is no longer just a thing to mess up chaos units. It's still a once per game aura of 6 inches. You get +1 to hit, +1 attack and +1 leadership for any Cadian units within range. The regimental tag doesn't always mean too much, but apparently Cadian will mean something, and some units will be locked to Cadia, and if you took say a Kriegsman squad, then you wouldn't be able to use this on them. If it's not locked to core units or anything like that, an aura of +1 to hit once per game does seem pretty big. Even if that was just buffing an artillery firebase or a tank line, it could be good. If it's just infantry only though, it could be a bit more underwhelming. The Order of the Bastium Stellaris is an infantry unit gaining wound rolls of 1 to 3 always fail, so basically transhuman physiology on something like a command squad. Again, a little bit of extra toughness there. Still not sure it's worth trying to make a guard character into a tank, when even with this they're probably going to be quite easy to kill. The Sigil of Sanction allows you to know and cast 1 extra power with a Psyker. Could just be good for an extra smite on top of whatever helpful buff that they need, but could give you a bit more flexibility within the discipline as well. This one does seem like it could be an interesting one if you are taking a Primaris Psyker along. The Armor of Graftichenko gives you +1 to wound and 2+ armor saves. This one's the old Vostroyan one, and it does make a character a bit more tanky. Perhaps one of the best ones out of the various durability relics so far, but still I've got kind of similar feelings on this one. And finally we've got the Laurels of Command, a once per game ability where you can issue 1 order out of sequence in your opponent's turn. I feel like it's perhaps going to be most useful for something like Take Cover. That could suddenly make a bunch of your units a lot harder to kill. Otherwise the options maybe just seem a little bit more limited, but even then pop-up light cover for a turn doesn't seem terrible. I guess you could also use this to get a tank commander to issue the objective secured one. That could be quite powerful if it happens in the command phase or something. Out of these, I must admit I'm not super overwhelmed with most of them. I feel like Gatekeeper looks like an interesting one. Extra damage is rarely going to be a bad thing, and having big Strength 9 AP3 anti-tank fire at long range does seem good. Otherwise, the Auto Reliquary for an extra order seems nice, as does knowing an extra power and casting 1 more. I'm not particularly sold on all of them though. So anyway, there we have it, some really cool guard leaks there, and of course all credits go to Mordian Glory. I thoroughly recommend going and checking out his YouTube channel and getting all the juicy details from the person who actually knows them firsthand. I'm sure I've made a few slip-ups in there, and apparently he's going to be posting a full breakdown of all the stuff he knows over on his channel in the very near future. It's been really cool to get to see some guard rules quite so early though, and get a bit more of a handle on how the Codex is actually going to be functioning. For overall takes, I think the biggest disappointment are removing things like conscripts, veterans and special weapon squads. That's really not a change that I wanted to see, and that's quite a lot of iconic guard units that just don't look like they're going to be fieldable. I think that the new regiment trait things are interesting, but I do feel like it might just come down to a couple of selections that get picked quite a bit, the same with quite a lot of custom traits. Without the Warlord Traits and Relics and stratagems and things, I just feel like there's a little bit less to draw people to different ways of playing. Otherwise though, there's plenty of good news. Orders look like they're more in-depth than ever, and they look quite fun to play with. Good to see that tank case things are still remaining in the book, and it's quite nice to have some more confirmations of exciting new model releases, the Lord Solar and the Rough Riders. I've got 30 of the things converted, so being able to field them en masse will be quite nice. Anyway, let me know what you make of the changes, if I've made any errors compared with the original source, and of course check out Mordian Glory's videos. He'll certainly have plenty more cool guard stuff to come. Finally, if you've enjoyed the videos on the channel, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics as well. I'll certainly be covering any more new guard details that we get from whatever source it comes out from. Hopefully Games Workshop will start giving us some actual proper previews of the Codex in the near future. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that links down in the video description if you want to help keep these videos coming. Making all the content does take an enormous amount of time and effort. I do post 40k videos daily, and if you have been enjoying quite a bit, then any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.